Story 1. The House That Appeared on December 24th. Daniel Hoffman had lived on Maple Grove Lane in Westfield, Massachusetts for 12 years. He knew every house on his street, every neighbor, every quirk of the old suburban development built in the 1970s. At 34, he worked as an accountant and lived alone in a modest 2-story colonial his parents had left him. His life was routine, predictable, and exactly how he liked it. Christmas Eve, 2019, started normally enough. Daniel woke at 7, made coffee, and worked from home finishing year-end reports for clients. Light snow had fallen overnight, coating the lawns and rooftops with a fresh white blanket. The neighborhood looked picturesque, like a greeting card. Most houses displayed the usual decorations: inflatable Santas, colored lights strung along gutters, wreaths on doors. The Hendersons at number 42 had their elaborate nativity scene. The Patels at 38 had lit their windows with electric candles. Everything was as it should be. Around 2 in the afternoon, Daniel took a break and walked to his mailbox. The cold air bit at his face, and his breath misted in front of him. That's when he noticed something odd. Between his house at number 44 and the Hendersons at 42, there was now a house at number 43. Daniel stopped walking. He stared at the structure, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The house was a Victorian, painted deep burgundy, with black shutters and ornate white trim around the windows and roofline. It had a wraparound porch, a turret on the left side with a conical roof, and elaborate gingerbread details that must have taken months to craft. Christmas lights outlined every architectural feature, thousands of bulbs in old-fashioned warm white, and a massive wreath hung on the front door. It was beautiful. It was also impossible. There had never been a house at number 43. The lots on Maple Grove Lane were numbered by 2s, 40, 42, 44 on one side, and 39, 41, 43 on the other. His side of the street had never had a 43. The space between his property and the Hendersons was just trees, maybe 20 feet of wooded buffer. He'd lived here 12 years. He would have noticed a Victorian mansion being built next door. Daniel walked closer, his shoes crunching on the frozen sidewalk. The house looked old, weathered in a charming way, like it had been standing for a century. The paint wasn't fresh. The porch boards showed wear. Even the Christmas lights looked vintage, the kind with large bulbs that his grandmother used to have. This wasn't a new construction. This was an old house, but it couldn't be. He pulled out his phone and Googled his street address, pulling up the satellite view. The image showed his house, the Henderson house, and trees between them. No Victorian. The image was dated 6 months ago. He switched to Street View, clicking through various angles. No house at 43. Daniel's hands were trembling, and not from the cold. He looked at the Henderson house, then back at the Victorian. Both were solid, real, occupying space. The Victorian's shadow fell across his driveway. He could see lights on inside, glowing warmly through lace curtains. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of burning wood. Someone lived there. He walked up the driveway, his heart pounding. The property was immaculate. The walkway had been shoveled, revealing old brick pavers. The porch steps were solid under his feet. He reached for the doorbell, an antique brass button, then hesitated. What would he say? "Excuse me, when did you move in? Because your house didn't exist this morning." Before he could decide, the door opened. A woman stood in the doorway. She appeared to be in her 60s, with white hair pulled back in a bun, and wearing a long velvet dress in deep green. Her face was kind, grandmotherly, with smile lines around her eyes. But those eyes were wrong somehow. Too bright, too knowing. "Daniel," she said warmly, "we've been expecting you. Won't you come in? It's Christmas Eve after all. He stepped back. How do you know my name? We're neighbors now. Of course we know you. Her smile widened. Please, come in. We have cookies. Gingerbread, your favorite. He hadn't told anyone gingerbread was his favorite. He'd barely thought about it himself in years. But yes, when he was a child, his mother had made gingerbread cookies every Christmas, and he'd loved them. I think there's been some mistake, Daniel said, his voice shaking. This house wasn't here this morning. Wasn't it? The woman tilted her head. Are you quite sure? Memory is such a tricky thing, especially at Christmas. So many memories, all blending together. Did you check your photos, Daniel? Your old photos? He hadn't. He pulled out his phone with fumbling fingers and opened his photo gallery. He had a picture from last summer, taken from his front porch, showing the view of the street. He zoomed in on the space between his house and the Hendersons. The Victorian was there, clear as day, visible between the trees. No, Daniel whispered. He scrolled back further. A picture from 3 years ago, winter, snow on the ground. The Victorian was there, lights strung on the porch. 5 years ago, a fall picture. The Victorian, its burgundy paint vivid against orange and red leaves. You see? The woman said gently. It's always been here. You've always known us. You're just remembering now. Daniel backed down the porch steps, nearly falling. Stay away from me. But Daniel, we need you to remember. That's why the house is visible today. It's time. The woman's expression remained kind, but something moved in the window behind her, a shadow too large and too dark to be human. It's time to come home. You've been next door for 12 years, but before that, you lived here, with us. Don't you remember Christmas Eve, 2007? You were 22. You came to our holiday party. Daniel felt dizzy. That was the year his parents died, both of them in a car accident 3 days before Christmas. That was the year he inherited the house. That was the year everything changed. I've never been to your house, he said. But even as he spoke, images flashed through his mind. A party. This porch, strung with lights. Warm cider. Laughter. Faces he couldn't quite see. And then darkness and cold. And waking up in his parents' house with no memory of how he got there. You made a choice that night, the woman continued. You wanted to forget. You wanted a normal life, away from us, away from what you'd seen. We honored that choice. We let you live next door, let you forget, let you be ordinary. But it's been 12 years, Daniel. The agreement was for 12 years. Now it's time to remember. It's time to come back. More shadows moved in the windows. The house seemed to grow larger, leaning over him, blocking out the gray winter sky. The Christmas lights burned brighter, almost painful to look at. What agreement? I never agreed to anything. You did. You begged us. You saw what exists beyond the veil, beyond the ordinary world, and it broke you. We offered you 12 years of peace, 12 years of forgetting, 12 years of being normal. In exchange, you would return to us on Christmas Eve, 2019. Today, Daniel ran. He sprinted across the lawn, his feet slipping on ice, and crashed through his front door. He slammed it shut and locked it, then ran to every window, closing curtains, checking locks. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He grabbed his laptop and pulled up real estate records. His house, number 44 Maple Grove Lane. The Henderson house, number 42 Maple Grove Lane. No 43, no Victorian. But when he looked out his window, pulling the curtain aside just an inch, there it was, solid and real, lights blazing. His doorbell rang. Daniel froze. He hadn't seen the woman leave her porch. He crept to his own door and looked through the peephole. The woman stood there, still smiling, but behind her, the street had changed. The other houses were dark, as if abandoned. The sky had turned fully black despite it being only 3 in the afternoon. Snow fell upward, drifting from the ground into the sky. "Daniel, don't make this difficult. You promised. A deal is a deal." He didn't answer. He backed away from the door, pulling out his phone to call 911. But his phone showed no signal. The screen flickered and text appeared. "It's time to come home." The doorbell rang again, and then his windows began to rattle. Every window in the house, shaking in their frames. The Christmas lights on the Victorian burned so brightly now that they illuminated his entire living room through the curtains, casting everything in harsh, white light. Daniel ran to his basement, thinking he could hide, wait this out. But when he reached the bottom of the stairs, he stopped. The basement was different, larger. The walls were rough stone instead of drywall. Candles burned in alcoves, and at the far end, a doorway he'd never seen before, outlined in warm light. Beyond the doorway, he could hear voices, a party, laughter, Christmas music from another era, and underneath it all, something else, something vast and patient, and not quite human, waiting for him to remember. Daniel stood at the threshold, trembling. Memories flooded back. The party in 2007, the beautiful people, the food and drink, and then the moment when he'd seen what they really were, what existed in this town, in this house, wearing faces and pretending to be human. The moment he'd screamed and begged to forget. The woman appeared in the doorway. Behind her, the party continued, shapes moving in the light. "Welcome home, Daniel. We've missed you. Now won't you join us? It's Christmas Eve, and the celebration has only just begun. This time, forever." Daniel knew he had a choice. He could refuse, could try to run. But he also knew, with horrible certainty, that he'd made a deal 12 years ago. And whatever these things were, they honored their deals. He'd had 12 years of forgetting, 12 years of peace. Now the bill was due. He stepped through the doorway, and behind him, his basement door slammed shut. Upstairs, his house fell silent and dark. Outside, if anyone had been watching, they would have seen the Victorian at number 43 flicker once, its lights dimming, before vanishing entirely from Maple Grove Lane. The next morning, Christmas Day, the Hendersons would comment to the Patels that the trees between 42 and 44 looked thicker somehow, more dense. And didn't Daniel usually stop by with cookies on Christmas? They'd knock on his door, but no one would answer. His car would be in the driveway. His lights would be on. But Daniel Hoffman would never be seen again. Though sometimes, late on December nights, neighbors walking past those trees would hear music, old music, from another era, and laughter, and one voice, screaming beneath it all, though only for a moment before falling silent once more. Story 2. The Mall Santa Who Remembered Everyone. Trevor Nichols worked mall security at Riverside Shopping Center in Portland, Oregon. At 28, he'd been on the job for 5 years, and Christmas season was always the most exhausting time of year. The crowds, the theft attempts, the lost children, the parking lot fender benders. December was chaos from Black Friday through New Year's Day. But he needed the overtime pay, so he never complained. The 2018 holiday season seemed typical at first. The mall had hired the usual seasonal staff, including the Santa for the center court photo station. Trevor had seen dozens of mall Santas over the years. Some were good with kids, some were terrible. Most were just older guys trying to make extra money, enduring screaming toddlers and bored teenagers for $12 an hour. This year's Santa was different. His name was Nicholas Frost, according to the employment paperwork Trevor had seen. The name alone seemed too perfect, like something from a movie. Nicholas appeared to be in his 70s, with genuine white hair and a real beard, not the fake polyester kind. He had rosy cheeks, twinkling blue eyes, and a deep, jolly laugh that echoed through the mall. He was perfect, too perfect. Trevor first noticed something odd on December 10th. He was patrolling the second floor when he heard a child crying at the Santa station. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, was sobbing in Santa's lap while her parents watched nervously from the side. Trevor moved closer, ready to intervene if needed. But then Santa leaned down and whispered something in the girl's ear. The crying stopped instantly. The girl's eyes went wide, and she stared at Santa with an expression Trevor couldn't quite read. Fear? Wonder? Both. Then she nodded slowly and climbed off his lap. Her parents looked relieved and confused. They tried to ask their daughter what Santa had said, but she wouldn't answer. She just kept staring back at Nicholas Frost as her parents led her away. Trevor caught the girl's eye for a moment. Her expression made his skin crawl. She looked like someone who'd just seen something they could never unsee. Over the next week, Trevor noticed more strange interactions. A teenage boy, probably 16, approached Santa as a joke with his friends. They were laughing, filming on their phones, ready to mock the whole experience. But when the boy sat on Santa's lap, Nicholas looked directly into his eyes and spoke quietly. The boy's smile vanished. He stood up slowly, handed his phone to his friend without a word, and walked away. His friends called after him, but he didn't respond. Trevor saw him sitting alone on a bench an hour later, staring at nothing, tears running down his face. On December 15th, an elderly woman in her 80s approached Santa. She had no children with her, no grandchildren. She just walked up during a lull in the line and stood before Nicholas Frost. They looked at each other for a long moment, and then she started crying. Not sad crying, relief. She was smiling and crying at the same time, and she kept saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Santa simply nodded and patted her hand. Trevor couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He started watching the Santa station more closely during his patrols. He noticed that Nicholas never took breaks. The other staff members rotated out every 2 hours. The photographer's assistant, the elf helpers. But Santa sat on that throne from mall opening at 9 until closing at 10, 13 hours straight, seeing hundreds of people per day. He never ate, never drank water, never used the bathroom. Just sat there, listening to wishes, whispering to children, staring into people's eyes with that knowing expression. On December 20th, Trevor decided to look into it. During his lunch break, he pulled up the mall's employment records on his security office computer. Nicholas Frost had applied on November 1st. Previous employment, Riverside Shopping Center, Portland, Oregon, 2017. Trevor frowned. He didn't remember Nicholas from last year. They'd had a different Santa, a guy named Carl something. He dug deeper, accessing older records. Nicholas Frost, employed 2016 and 2015 and 2014. Going back 20 years, every single year, Nicholas Frost had been the Riverside Mall Santa. But Trevor had only worked here 5 years, and he definitely didn't remember Nicholas from his first Christmas. He remembered Carl, and before Carl, there had been a younger guy named David who'd been fired for showing up drunk. Trevor's hands were shaking as he scrolled through scanned application forms. The signature was always the same. The handwriting never aged. Even the photo, mall policy required a photo with each application, showed the same face, year after year after year, unchanged. Nicholas Frost in 1998 looked identical to Nicholas Frost in 2018. That was impossible. Trevor printed out several of the applications and stared at them. Same person, had to be. But people aged, everyone aged. In 20 years, you'd see some difference. Gray hair got whiter, faces got more wrinkled, bodies got older. Nicholas Frost looked exactly the same in every photo. He was still staring at the printouts when his radio crackled. "Trevor, we need you at Center Court. Situation with Santa." He ran. When he arrived, a crowd had gathered around the Santa station. At the center, A man in his 40s was shouting at Nicholas, who sat calmly on his throne. The man was crying, his face red, spit flying as he screamed. "How do you know that? How the fuck do you know that? Who told you? Who are you?" The elf helpers looked terrified. The photographer was backing away. Security guard Rodriguez was trying to calm the man, but he kept lunging toward Santa. "Sir, you need to calm down," Trevor said, moving between them. "What's going on?" "He told me." The man choked on his words. "My daughter wanted to sit on Santa's lap. She's 6. She told him she wanted a puppy for Christmas, and he looked at me and said..." The man broke down completely, sobbing. Nicholas Frost spoke, his voice deep and gentle. "I simply told him that his daughter would be very happy with a puppy, and that he should cherish every moment with her, because we never know how much time we have. I told him that his daughter would particularly love a golden retriever, and that he should name it Sunny, because that will bring light into dark times." "My daughter died last Christmas," the man whispered. "She was 6. She wanted a puppy. We were going to surprise her on Christmas morning. We'd already picked out the dog, a golden retriever. We were going to name it Sunny. She died 3 days before Christmas. Car accident." The crowd went silent. "How do you know this?" the man asked again, quieter now. "How do you know about my daughter?" Nicholas stood up for the first time Trevor had ever seen. He was tall, over 6 feet, and when he stood, the temperature seemed to drop. Everyone felt it. People wrapped their arms around themselves. Breath misted in the air. "I remember everyone," Nicholas said. "Every child who ever sat on my lap, every wish, every Christmas. I remember your daughter. She sat right here last December 15th, 2017. She wore a red dress and had a loose front tooth. She told me she wanted a puppy and a baby brother. She was a beautiful child with a kind heart." "That's impossible," Trevor said. "You weren't the Santa here last year." Nicholas turned to look at him, and Trevor felt the full weight of that gaze. Those blue eyes weren't twinkling anymore. They were ancient, cold, endless. "I'm always the Santa here," Nicholas said quietly. "I've always been the Santa, at every mall, in every city, in every year. I'm every Santa you've ever seen, every department store, every street corner, every Christmas party. When you see Santa, you see me. You just don't remember." The crowd was backing away now. Someone screamed. Rodriguez reached for his radio, but it wouldn't work. None of the radios worked. Trevor's phone was dead. The mall lights flickered. "I remember everyone," Nicholas continued, addressing the crowd now. "Every child, every wish, every hope and dream and secret fear. I remember what you wanted when you were 5 years old. I remember what you've lost. I remember what you've done. I am the keeper of wishes and the witness of Christmases past and present and future." He looked at each person in the crowd, and as his gaze fell on them, they gasped or cried out or simply stood frozen. "You," he said, pointing at a woman in her 30s. "You wished for your mother to survive cancer. She didn't. You stopped believing." The woman burst into tears. "You," pointing at a teenage boy. "You wished for your parents to stop fighting. They divorced anyway. You stopped believing." The boy's face went pale. "You," pointing at Rodriguez. "You wished for your brother to come home from war. He didn't. You stopped believing." One by one, he called out people in the crowd, reciting their childhood wishes, their losses, their reasons for abandoning the magic of Christmas. And with each revelation, the mall grew colder. Trevor's turn came. Nicholas looked directly at him. "Trevor Nichols, age 28. When you were 7 years old, you sat on Santa's lap at this very mall. It was called West Side Center then, before the renovation. You wished for your father to stop drinking. You wished so hard. You truly believed. But he didn't stop. He got worse. And on Christmas Eve, 1997, he drove drunk and killed a family of 4 in a head-on collision. He survived. They didn't. You stopped believing in wishes that night. You stopped believing in magic. You stopped believing in hope. Trevor couldn't breathe. He'd never told anyone about that. His father was still in prison. Trevor had changed his last name when he turned 18, had built a whole new life, had buried that past so deep he barely thought about it anymore. How? Trevor whispered. Because I was there, Nicholas said. I heard your wish. I saw your belief. And I watched it die when reality crashed through the illusion. That's what I do, Trevor. I collect wishes. I witness belief. And I remember when it breaks. The mall was freezing now. People were running, trying to escape, but the exits wouldn't open. The automatic doors were frozen shut. The escalators had stopped moving. You're not Santa, Trevor said, his teeth chattering. Santa brings joy. He grants wishes. He's magic and hope and... Santa is a fairy tale for children, Nicholas interrupted. I am what's real. I am what happens to wishes when they die. I am the collector of broken dreams, the keeper of abandoned hopes. I am every unanswered prayer and every disappointed Christmas morning. I am what you created when you stopped believing. He spread his arms, and his red suit seemed to deepen in color, becoming darker, almost black in the flickering lights. You need me, Nicholas continued. You need me to remember, because you've all forgotten. Forgotten what you wished for, what you dreamed of, what you used to believe. Someone has to remember. Someone has to carry the weight of all those dead wishes, all those broken promises, all those shattered beliefs. That's my purpose. That's my curse. Trevor realized people were crying all around him. Everyone in the crowd, young and old, was weeping. Not from fear anymore, from memory, from loss, from the sudden, crushing weight of every wish they'd ever made that hadn't come true. Why? Trevor managed to ask. Why do this? Why tell us? Why make us remember? Nicholas's expression softened slightly, becoming almost sad. Because someone must bear witness. The wishes don't simply disappear. The dreams don't just evaporate. They have to go somewhere. They accumulate in me, year after year, century after century. I carry them all. Every child who cried when they didn't get what they wanted. Every adult who lost their sense of wonder. Every broken heart on Christmas morning. I remember, so you don't have to. The mall lights stopped flickering and stabilized. The cold began to recede. The exits opened with a soft whoosh. People started moving, slowly at first, then running for the doors. Within minutes, the center court was empty, except for Trevor, Nicholas, and the terrified seasonal staff huddled near the photo backdrop. Trevor should have run too. But he couldn't move. He stared at Nicholas Frost, at this impossible being wearing a Santa suit. What happens now? Trevor asked. Now. Nicholas sat back down on his throne. Now I continue. I'll sit here until Christmas Eve, and children will come, and I'll hear their wishes. Most won't come true. They never do. But I'll remember them all. And next year, I'll be at another mall, in another city, wearing the same suit, playing the same role. Forever. That's horrible, Trevor whispered. Yes, Nicholas agreed. It is, but it's necessary. Someone has to remember the wishes, even the broken ones, especially the broken ones. Trevor finally found the strength to move. He backed away, then turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, he heard Nicholas's deep voice call out, "Merry Christmas, Trevor. May this year be different." But Trevor knew it wouldn't be. Nothing would be different. Wishes didn't come true just because you wanted them to. Magic wasn't real. Hope was for children. He walked out into the December night, the cold air burning his lungs, and he didn't look back. The mall stayed open through Christmas Eve. Nicholas Frost sat on his throne, seeing hundreds more children, hearing hundreds more wishes. And when the mall closed at 6 p.m. on December 24th, Nicholas Frost stood up, removed his hat, and walked out through the employee exit. The seasonal staff found the throne empty. No note, no forwarding address. His employee locker was cleaned out. It was as if he'd never been there at all. Trevor checked the employment records the day after Christmas. Nicholas Frost's file was gone. No applications, no time cards, no tax documents, nothing. But Trevor knew he'd been real. The memories were too vivid, too heavy. And when Trevor went home that night, he found something in his mailbox, a photograph, old, faded, from 1997. It showed a 7-year-old boy sitting on Santa's lap at Westside Center, smiling with innocent belief. On the back, in elegant handwriting, "I remember, always." Trevor kept that photo. He never went back to Riverside Shopping Center. He quit his security job and moved to another city, trying to escape the memory. But sometimes, late at night, he'd take out that photo and stare at it, at the boy he used to be, at the Santa whose face he now knew was Nicholas Frost. And he'd wonder what happened to all those wishes, where they went, how heavy they must be. And he'd think about Nicholas Frost, cursed to remember every broken dream, every shattered hope, every Christmas that disappointed. The keeper of wishes, the collector of broken magic, the Santa who remembered everyone, forever. Story 3, the carolers who sang the wrong song. Bradley Webb had lived in the Ashwood Heights neighborhood of Denver, Colorado, for 16 years. The subdivision was pleasant and quiet, full of young families and retirees, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and looked out for each other. At 42, Bradley was content with his life, a good job in IT consulting, a comfortable house, and enough savings to retire early if he wanted to. He'd never married, never felt the need. He valued his privacy and his routines. Christmas had never been his favorite holiday, but he appreciated the neighborhood's festive atmosphere. People decorated their houses with lights and inflatable Santas. The HOA organized a decorating contest. Kids built snowmen in their yards. It was all harmless and pleasant, and Bradley tolerated it with good humor. December 21st, 2021 was a Friday night. Bradley had finished work early and was settling in for a quiet evening. He'd made dinner, poured a glass of wine, and was halfway through a documentary when his doorbell rang at 7 p.m. He opened the door to find a group of carolers on his porch. There were 12 of them, arranged in 3 rows on his front steps. They wore Victorian-era clothing, long coats and scarves, bonnets and top hats. The style seemed oddly authentic, not the cheap costume versions you'd see at themed parties. The fabric looked genuinely old, worn in places, with actual age and use. "Good evening," said the woman in front, a severe-looking lady in her 50s with gray hair, pulled back in a tight bun. "We're caroling through the neighborhood. May we sing for you?" Bradley almost said no. He'd been looking forward to his quiet evening. But the group looked so earnest, and it was Christmas season after all. "Sure," he said. "Go ahead." The carolers arranged themselves more formally. The severe woman raised her hand like a conductor, and they began to sing. The song wasn't one Bradley recognized. The melody was haunting and minor key. Nothing like the cheerful Christmas standards he expected. The lyrics were strange, too. Something about shadows and waiting and doors opening on the longest night. Their voices were beautiful, but unsettling, harmonizing in ways that made his skin prickle. When they finished, Bradley felt distinctly uncomfortable. That was different, not a traditional carol. "Oh, it's very traditional," the woman said with a thin smile. "Older than most. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow night." "You don't need to," Bradley started, but they were already moving to the next house, their dark shapes processing down the sidewalk in perfect formation. Bradley closed his door and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. It was just carolers. Weird ones, maybe, but harmless. He returned to his documentary and didn't think about it again until the next night. 7 p.m., his doorbell rang. The same group stood on his porch, wearing the same Victorian clothing. The severe woman smiled that thin smile again. "Good evening. We've come to sing the second verse." "Look, I appreciate it, but I really don't." They started singing before he could finish. The same song as yesterday, but this verse was darker. The lyrics mentioned names, Victorian names like Abigail and Nathaniel and Elias, and described them opening doors and stepping through. The harmonies were even more complex, creating dissonant notes that made Bradley's teeth ache. When they finished, he felt genuinely disturbed. "What is that song? I've never heard it before." "You have," the woman said. "Everyone in Ashwood Heights has heard it. You just don't remember yet. We'll be back tomorrow." They left again, moving to his neighbor's house. Bradley watched through his window as they sang on Mrs. Patterson's porch next door. Even from a distance, he could see Mrs. Patterson's uncomfortable expression as she listened. Bradley grabbed his coat and walked outside, catching Mrs. Patterson as the carolers moved on. "Helen, did those carolers come to your door last night?" She nodded, her wrinkled face troubled. "Yes. Strange song they're singing, isn't it? I've lived in Denver 73 years and never heard anything like it. Asked my daughter about it. She's a music teacher, and she didn't recognize it either. Did they say they'd be back?" "Tomorrow night, apparently. Third verse," the woman said. Helen shivered despite her heavy coat. "There's something wrong about them, Bradley. The way they look at you when they sing, like they're waiting for something." Over the next hour, Bradley talked to 6 more neighbors. All of them had received visits from the carolers on the previous 2 nights. All of them found the song disturbing and unfamiliar, and all of them had been told the carolers would return the next night. "It's probably just some avant-garde group doing weird performance art," suggested Tom Rodriguez, from 3 houses down. "Denver's full of that kind of thing. They'll finish whatever strange project this is and move on." But Bradley couldn't shake his unease. That night, he lay in bed unable to sleep, the melody running through his head. Those minor chords, those strange lyrics about doors and shadows, and the longest night. December 21st, today, had been the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Sunday evening, December 22nd, 7 p.m. His doorbell rang. Bradley considered not answering, but curiosity won. The same 12 carolers stood on his porch. The severe woman's smile was wider now, showing teeth. "Good evening, Bradley. Time for the third verse." He definitely hadn't told her his name. They sang. This verse was about blood and belonging, about debts owed and contracts signed, about names written in old books and doors that wouldn't close once opened. Their voices rose and fell in patterns that seemed mathematically impossible, harmonies layering upon harmonies until Bradley felt dizzy. When they stopped, the silence was deafening. 4 more nights, the woman said. 7 verses in total, 1 for each night until Christmas Eve. By the 7th verse, everyone will remember. "Remember what?" Bradley demanded. "What happened here? What this place was built on? What was promised?" She leaned forward, and her eyes were completely black, reflecting nothing. "This neighborhood is 212 years old, Bradley. Not the houses. Those are new. But the land, the ground you're standing on. In 1809, there were 12 families here. They made a deal to survive a terrible winter. They promised something in exchange for warmth and food and survival. They promised their descendants, 7 generations forward, on the longest night of the year, December 24th, 1809. Bradley's mouth went dry. "That's insane. This neighborhood was built in 1985. I've seen the original development plans." The houses were built in 1985, the woman agreed. But the land remembers, and we remember. We've been waiting 212 years, 7 generations. The promise comes due in 3 more days. This is some kind of prank, Bradley said. But his voice shook. The carolers said nothing. They simply turned and walked to the next house, their Victorian clothes swishing, their footsteps silent on the concrete. Bradley slammed his door and immediately Googled the history of his neighborhood. According to official records, the land had been undeveloped farmland until 1985, when Ashwood Heights was built. No mention of any settlement from the 1800s. But he kept searching, digging into newspaper archives and historical society records. 3 hours later, he found it. A small article from an 1810 Denver Gazette mentioning the mysterious disappearance of a small community called Ashwood Grove. 12 families vanished without trace during the winter of 1809 to 1810. Their homes had been found empty, fires still burning in hearths, food on tables, but no people, not even bodies. The article noted the community had been located 3 miles east of the Denver settlement, near the creek. Bradley pulled up a map. His neighborhood was 3 miles east of what had been 1810 Denver, right where Ashwood Grove would have been. He called an emergency neighborhood meeting the next morning. 40 people showed up at the community center, everyone talking at once. Everyone had received visits from the carolers. Everyone had heard the strange song, and everyone had been told there were 4 more verses to come. "We need to call the police," Mrs. Patterson said. "And tell them what?" Tom Rodriguez countered. "That weird carolers are singing at us? It's not illegal." "They knew my name," Bradley said. "They know all our names, and they're telling us we're part of some 200-year-old deal we never made." "It's psychological warfare," suggested Janet Kim, a lawyer who lived on Maple Drive. "They researched the neighborhood, found that old story about Ashwood Grove, and they're trying to scare us. Probably planning to rob houses while everyone's freaked out." It sounded rational. Bradley wanted to believe it. But he couldn't forget those black eyes, that impossible singing, the way the temperature had dropped 10 degrees while they performed. That night, December 23rd, 7 p.m., they returned. Bradley stood at his window and watched them process down the street, stopping at each house in turn. When they reached his porch, he didn't answer the door. But they sang anyway, their voices penetrating the walls like they were paper. The 4th verse was about darkness and cold, about 12 families who'd huddled together in a terrible winter, starving and freezing, watching their children die. About something that came to them and offered survival. About the price they agreed to pay. Bradley covered his ears, but he could still hear them. The song wasn't coming through his ears anymore. It was inside his head, resonating in his skull. When they finished, the woman's voice called out, "3 verses remaining, Bradley. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. The 7th verse completes the song. The 7th verse opens the door. Your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather signed the contract. His name was Nathaniel Webb. He was one of the 12. Your blood carries the promise." Bradley ran to his computer with shaking hands. Nathaniel Webb. He'd never researched his family tree that far back, but genealogy websites existed for that purpose. He paid for a premium membership and started searching. 2 hours later, he had his answer. Nathaniel Webb, born 1781, married to Abigail Webb, relocated to Colorado Territory in 1808, settled in a small community called Ashwood Grove, disappeared without trace in December 1809. Bradley was his direct descendant, 7 generations forward, exactly as the woman had said. He called every neighbor who'd attended the meeting. They all researched their families. Every single one of them descended from one of the 12 Ashwood Grove families. Every single one was 7th generation. "This is impossible," Janet Kim kept saying. How would anyone even know that? How would anyone track that? They've been watching, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. For 200 years, they've been watching, waiting for all 12 families to be back in the same place, waiting for the 7th generation to build homes on the exact same land. Christmas Eve arrived. The neighborhood was in full panic by morning. Half the residents had loaded up their cars, planning to leave town until this was over. But when they tried to drive out of Ashwood Heights, they found themselves somehow turning around, arriving back at their own houses without realizing they'd changed direction. The neighborhood was trapped. 7 p.m. approached like a death sentence. Bradley stood in his living room, watching the sun set, watching the longest night of the year deepen into darkness. Other neighbors emerged from their houses, gathering in the street, as if being together might somehow protect them. At exactly 7 p.m., the carolers appeared at the entrance to the neighborhood, all 12 of them, walking in formation down the main street. But they looked different now, less human. Their Victorian clothes were rotted, hanging in tatters. Their faces were pale and wrong, skin stretched too tight over skulls. The severe woman led them, and her black eyes reflected the Christmas lights strung on houses, making her look demonic. They began to sing. All 7 verses, one after another, building and building until the harmonies became overwhelming. The song filled the air, filled people's heads, filled the world. It was beautiful and terrible and inevitable. The lyrics told the whole story. 12 families, desperate and dying. Something ancient in the land, old when the native tribes first walked these plains. Something that fed on warmth and life. A deal struck. Survival for 1 generation in exchange for their descendants, 7 generations forward, return to the same ground. The families had survived that winter. They'd had food and warmth despite the terrible cold. But they knew what they'd done, what they'd promised. They'd tried to run, tried to break the deal. And so they'd been taken immediately, pulled into the dark, consumed by what they'd bargained with. But their children had survived, scattered, carrying the bloodlines forward. And the thing in the land had waited patiently for 212 years, knowing the promise would eventually be fulfilled. When the 7th verse ended, the ground began to crack. Not earthquake shaking, something worse. The pavement and lawns split open, revealing darkness underneath. Not dirt and rock, but pure blackness, infinite and hungry. The carolers' voices dropped away, and in the silence, everyone could hear breathing. Massive, slow breathing, like the earth itself had lungs. "It's time," the severe woman said, her voice echoing impossibly. "The children of Ashwood Grove have come home. The promise is fulfilled." The cracks widened. People screamed. Some tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The entire neighborhood was opening up, revealing the hungry darkness below. Bradley felt himself being pulled toward the nearest crack. Others were being pulled too, dragged by invisible force toward the openings. Mrs. Patterson fell first, tumbling into blackness with a cut-off scream. Then Tom Rodriguez. Then Janet Kim. One by one, the descendants of Ashwood Grove fell into the dark. Bradley struggled, grabbing at anything, but the pull was irresistible. He looked up one last time and saw the carolers standing at the edge of the destruction, untouched, watching with satisfaction. Then he fell, and the darkness swallowed him, and there was nothing but cold and hunger, and the slow, patient breathing of something vast and ancient that was finally being fed what it was owed. Christmas morning, December 25th, 2021. Police received calls about Ashwood Heights from concerned relatives who couldn't reach their family members. Officers arrived to find 43 houses standing empty. Cars in driveways, food on tables, Christmas trees with wrapped presents underneath, but no people, not even bodies. The official investigation found nothing. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. 43 people had simply vanished overnight. The neighborhood was eventually demolished, the land returned to undeveloped space. The city sold it to a conservation group who fenced it off and posted no trespassing signs. But sometimes, late on December nights, hikers passing nearby report hearing music. Victorian caroling in complex harmonies, a song nobody recognizes in a minor key about doors and darkness and promises kept. And the land waits patiently, already counting forward to the next 7 generations. Story 4, the Advent Calendar, that counted down to nothing. Ryan Mitchell taught high school English in Fairview, Connecticut. At 31, he'd been teaching for 8 years and had settled into the comfortable rhythms of the academic year. December was always chaotic, students excited for winter break, attention spans dwindling, the pressure of finals week. But Ryan enjoyed the holiday atmosphere, the decorated classrooms, the way even the most cynical teenagers softened a little bit around Christmas. On December 1st, 2020, he arrived at school to find a gift on his desk. A large Advent calendar, still wrapped in plastic, with a note. "For Mr. Mitchell, our favorite teacher. Have a wonderful Christmas." The card wasn't signed. Ryan assumed it was from one of his students, a kind gesture. The Advent calendar was beautiful, made of heavy cardboard with intricate illustrations of a Victorian village scene. Each day had a small window to open, numbered 1 through 24, leading up to Christmas Eve. Ryan displayed it on the bookshelf behind his desk. Between classes, he opened the first window. Inside was a small chocolate, shaped like a star. Nothing unusual. He ate it and thought nothing more about it. December 2nd, he opened the second window. Another chocolate, this one shaped like a tree. But tucked behind it was something else. A tiny slip of paper with writing on it. Ryan pulled it out and read, "Remember Jenny Adams?" He frowned. Jenny Adams had been one of his students 3 years ago. Bright girl, loved literature, especially poetry. She'd graduated in 2018 and gone to college somewhere in Massachusetts. He hadn't thought about her in months, but the name brought back pleasant memories of a good student. Odd thing to put in an Advent calendar, though. December 3rd, the third window revealed another chocolate and another note. "Remember Robert Torres." Robert had also been a former student, graduated in 2017. Ryan remembered him too. Quiet kid, struggled with English, but worked hard, always stayed after class for extra help. This was getting strange. Ryan looked more carefully at the Advent calendar, checking the packaging. There was no brand name, no manufacturing information. Just the beautiful Victorian village illustration and the numbered windows. He asked his students if any of them had given him the calendar. They all denied it. He checked with the front office. No record of a delivery. The calendar had simply appeared on his desk. That night at home, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would someone create an Advent calendar with his former students' names inside? It felt invasive, unsettling. He considered throwing it away, but curiosity kept him from it. December 4th, remember Ashley Kim. December 5th, remember Michael Sanders. December 6th, remember David Liu. All former students, all from different years. Ryan started keeping a list, writing down each name as it appeared. He tried to find a pattern. Maybe these students had all been in the same class, or graduated the same year, or had something else in common. But there was no obvious connection. Different years, different class periods, different academic levels. On December 7th, he opened the window and found, "Remember Emma Preston." Ryan's hands started shaking. Emma Preston. He knew that name, but not as a student. Emma had been a friend of a friend, someone he'd met at a party 2 years ago. They'd talked for maybe 20 minutes. He'd never seen her again, hadn't thought about her since. How would anyone know about Emma Preston? That brief conversation at a party had been utterly forgettable, just small talk between strangers. December 8th. Remember Thomas Wade. Thomas had been his college roommate freshman year, 15 years ago. They'd lost touch after that first semester. December 9th. Remember Sarah Mitchell. Ryan dropped the slip of paper. Sarah Mitchell was his sister. She died in a car accident when Ryan was 19 and she was 17. He never talked about her, never mentioned her to students. The pain was too old, too deep. Someone was messing with him. Someone had researched his life, his past, his family. But why? What was the point? Ryan brought the advent calendar to the police on December 10th. The officer took his report seriously. Stalking cases started exactly like this, with seemingly harmless but increasingly disturbing behavior. They took the calendar as evidence and told Ryan they'd investigate. But December 11th, he arrived at school to find another advent calendar on his desk, identical to the first. Same Victorian village, same numbered windows. Days 1 through 10 had already been opened, each containing the exact same notes as the previous calendar. Ryan didn't touch day 11. He called the police immediately. They came to the school, took this calendar too, dusted for prints, found nothing. The school's security cameras showed no one entering his classroom after hours. Yet on December 12th, another calendar appeared. And on the 13th, when Ryan deliberately locked his classroom door and took the latest calendar home with him, he woke up on December 14th to find another one on his nightstand. He was being haunted by advent calendars. Ryan stopped opening them, but somehow the windows opened themselves. Each morning, the appropriate day's window would be open, the chocolate gone, the note sitting in the empty space. December 15th. Remember Marcus Stevens. Marcus had been a kid in Ryan's neighborhood when he was growing up. They'd played together a few times. Marcus had drowned in a pool accident when they were both 11 years old. December 16th. Remember Jennifer Walsh, his first girlfriend from high school. They'd dated for 3 months when he was 16. She'd moved away to California. He hadn't thought about her in years. December 17th. Remember Patrick O'Connor. The name meant nothing to Ryan. He'd never known anyone named Patrick O'Connor. He searched his memory, his old yearbooks, his social media connections. Nothing. That night, he Googled the name with Fairview, Connecticut. An article from 2009 appeared. Local man dies in house fire. Patrick O'Connor, age 47, had died in a fire at his home on Birch Street. Birch Street was Ryan's street. Patrick O'Connor had died in the house Ryan now lived in 11 years ago. Ryan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room, staring at the advent calendar on his coffee table, watching it like it might attack him. At 12:01 a.m., as December 18th arrived, the next window clicked open by itself. Ryan forced himself to look. Remember Linda O'Connor, Patrick's wife. She'd died 2 months after the fire, according to the obituary Ryan found. Suicide, December 19th. Remember Amy O'Connor, their daughter. Ryan couldn't find any information about her. No obituary, no social media, nothing. She'd vanished from public record after her parents' deaths. On December 20th, Ryan didn't get out of bed. He called in sick, locked his bedroom door, and refused to look at the advent calendar he knew would appear somewhere in his house. But around noon, he heard a sound from his living room. A soft click. The window for December 20th had opened. Ryan crept downstairs, knowing he was being ridiculous, knowing he should just leave the house and check into a hotel, but unable to resist seeing what the note said. Remember Ryan Mitchell? His own name. His hands trembled as he stared at the slip of paper. What did that mean? Remember himself? He was right here. He existed. He was 31 years old, alive, teaching English at Fairview High School. But was he? The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. How did he know? How did anyone really know they were real, that their memories were accurate, that they existed in the way they believed they did? Ryan grabbed his laptop and started searching for himself. Facebook profile, yes. LinkedIn, yes. School website with faculty photos, yes. His driver's license in his wallet, his mail with his name on it, his bills, his bank accounts. All proof that Ryan Mitchell existed. But something felt wrong. Off. Like when you say a word too many times and it stops sounding like a real word. December 21st. You died in the fire. No, that was insane. Ryan was alive. He was standing in his living room, breathing, thinking. Dead people didn't do that. But the note sat there, small and white and undeniable. He called his mother in Florida. She answered on the third ring, her voice, cheerful and familiar. They talked about Christmas plans, about the weather, about nothing important. She sounded real. But afterward, Ryan realized she'd asked nothing about his life. No questions about school, about his job, about his friends. Just pleasant, empty conversation. December 22nd. The fire was 11 years ago. 11 years. Ryan tried to remember 11 years ago. He would have been 20 years old in college. What had he been doing? He couldn't remember. The memories were hazy, generic, studying, going to classes, normal college things. When had he moved into this house? He'd been here. How long? 5 years? 6? He couldn't remember the move. Couldn't remember signing the lease or carrying boxes or painting walls. The house had just always been here, and he'd always been in it. December 23rd. Amy O'Connor survived. Ryan sat on his couch, staring at the note for hours. Amy O'Connor, the daughter. He did the math. She would be 31 now, the same age as Ryan. She'd been 20 when her parents died in the fire. He looked at his driver's license. The photo didn't quite look like him. Or maybe it did, but he couldn't tell anymore. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. The face was familiar, but was it his? He called the school and asked when he'd been hired. The secretary told him he'd been teaching there 8 years. He asked what had happened to the previous English teacher, the one who'd held his position before him. There wasn't one, Mr. Mitchell. We created the position when you applied. You were the first. But someone must have taught English before me. Of course, several teachers, but not in your position. Your job was new. Ryan hung up slowly. His position hadn't existed before him. He'd been created along with it. 8 years ago, 3 years after the fire, December 24th, Christmas Eve. Ryan's hands shook as he reached for the final window. He'd known this moment was coming. 24 days of revelations, each one pulling away another layer of his reality, showing him the truth underneath. He opened the last window. There was no chocolate, just a note longer than the others. Your name is Amy O'Connor. You were 20 years old when your parents died in the fire that destroyed your childhood home. The grief drove you to attempt suicide, following your mother. You survived physically, but psychologically, you created a new identity. You became Ryan Mitchell, a person who had never known trauma, never lost anyone, never experienced that night. You changed your name legally. You moved to a different town, Fairview, instead of Fairbrook. You created new memories, a new history, a new life. But the truth remains. You are Amy O'Connor. This house is your house, rebuilt on the same foundation. These are your parents' deaths you're commemorating. And every December, the truth tries to surface. So you created this calendar to help yourself remember, to force yourself to acknowledge what you've been running from for 11 years. Ryan, or Amy, collapsed onto the floor, the note fluttering from shaking hands. Memories were surfacing now. real ones, breaking through the constructed reality. The fire, Mom's funeral, the pills, and the hospital. The therapist who'd suggested that sometimes survival meant becoming someone new. The face in the mirror wasn't wrong. It was different. 11 years of hormone therapy, surgery, transformation. Not because of gender dysphoria, but because of trauma. Becoming so completely different that the person who'd experienced that tragedy no longer existed. Ryan Mitchell was a construct, a shelter, a protective fiction. But underneath, Amy O'Connor had always remained, carrying the grief, hiding from it, remembering and forgetting in cycles. The Advent calendar had been Amy's creation, though Ryan hadn't known it. A yearly ritual forcing the acknowledgement that both identities existed. Both were real. Both were true. Ryan sat on the floor until dawn, holding that final note as memories of two lives, two identities, merged together into something new, something whole. Not Ryan or Amy, but both simultaneously. On Christmas morning, they, he, she, they, some pronoun that contained multitudes, packed a bag and drove to the cemetery where Patrick and Linda O'Connor were buried. It was the first visit in 11 years. "I'm sorry I forgot you," they whispered at the graves. "I had to forget to survive, but I'm remembering now. I'm finally remembering." The Advent calendar remained in the house, all 24 windows open, empty now. Each year, it would appear again on December the 1st, beginning the countdown. The reminder, the truth. Some people run from their trauma by forgetting. Amy O'Connor had run so far they'd become someone else entirely. But the past always remembers, even when we don't. And sometimes it sends us Advent calendars to help us find our way back. Story 5. The Christmas Tree, Lot That Sold More Than Trees. Jeffrey Palmer owned a small hardware store in Brookside, Wisconsin. At 54, he'd been running Palmer's Hardware for 26 years, ever since taking over from his father. The business did well enough, not making him rich, but providing a comfortable living. Every December, he supplemented his income by running a Christmas tree lot in the hardware store's parking lot. The 2017 season started like any other. Jeffrey received his shipment of trees on November 25th. 200 Fraser firs and Douglas firs from a supplier in North Carolina he'd used for years. He and his 2 part-time employees, college kids named Tyler and Madison, spent the day setting up the lot, arranging trees by size, stringing lights, and positioning the little sales shed. They opened for business the day after Thanksgiving. The first few customers were regulars Jeffrey recognized from previous years. The Henderson family, the Choys, old Mrs. Abbott, who always bought the smallest tree available. Everything seemed normal. On December 3rd, a man Jeffrey didn't recognize came to the lot around dusk. He was tall, maybe 6'4", wearing an expensive coat and leather gloves. He walked through the rows of trees slowly, examining them with unusual intensity, running his hands over the branches, smelling the needles, even tasting them occasionally. "Can I help you find something?" Jeffrey asked. The man turned, and Jeffrey felt an instinctive recoil. There was something wrong about the man's face. Too symmetrical, too perfect. Like a movie star, but in a way that was unsettling rather than attractive. "I'm looking for a very specific tree," the man said. His voice was smooth but strange, like he was speaking English but thinking in another language, translating as he went. 7 feet tall, full branches, no bare spots, and it must smell of memory. Smell of memory? Yes, you know the smell. When certain scents trigger recollection. I need a tree that smells of someone's childhood, someone's lost Christmas, someone's grief. Jeffrey laughed uncertainly. "I don't think I can help with that. These are just regular trees. They smell like pine." The man's too perfect face shifted into something that might have been a smile. Show me what you have." Jeffrey showed him several 7-foot trees. The man rejected each one after a brief inspection, offering no explanation. Finally, after examining perhaps 20 trees, he stopped at one near the back of the lot. "This one," he said. "How much?" $75. The man pulled out a wallet and handed Jeffrey a $100 bill. "Keep the change. I'll need it delivered." He provided an address on Willow Road, about 2 miles from the hardware store. Jeffrey wrote it down, tied the tree to his truck after the man left, and drove over that evening. The address led to an old Victorian house, set back from the road behind a tall iron fence. Jeffrey had never noticed it before, which was odd. He'd lived in Brookside his entire life and thought he knew every street. The house was dark except for one lit window on the second floor. He hauled the tree to the porch and rang the doorbell. The tall man answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting right behind the door. "Bring it inside," he said. Jeffrey wrestled the tree through the doorway and into the living room. The interior of the house was stranger than the exterior. The furniture looked antique, genuinely old, not reproduction. The walls were covered in framed photographs, hundreds of them, all black and white or sepia-toned. But what struck Jeffrey was the complete absence of Christmas decorations. No lights, no wreaths, no ornaments. Just this empty room with antique furniture and photographs. "Stand it in the corner," the man instructed. Jeffrey positioned the tree, secured it in the stand the man provided, and stepped back. The man circled the tree slowly, examining it from every angle, occasionally reaching out to touch a branch. "Perfect," he finally said. "This tree remembers." "Remembers what?" "Christmas 1987. A family in North Carolina. 2 children. They picked this tree from a farm. It stood in their living room for 3 weeks. The older child died on December 27th. Leukemia. The tree absorbed that grief, that transition from joy to devastation. Can't you smell it?" Jeffrey sniffed the air. He smelled pine, nothing else. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man turned to face him, and his eyes were wrong. No white, no iris, just solid black, like a shark's. "You will. Others will come to your lot now. They'll ask for specific trees. You'll sell them. That's all you need to do." "I think I should go." "Yes, go." Jeffrey ran. He got in his truck and drove away, his heart hammering. When he looked in the rearview mirror, the Victorian house was gone. Just empty lot with overgrown grass. He tried to convince himself it had been a prank, that he'd gotten the address wrong, that he'd imagined the man's eyes. But the $100 bill in his wallet was real enough. The next evening, December 4th, a woman came to the lot just before closing. She was middle-aged, wearing a long coat, her face sad and worn. "I'm looking for a tree that remembers Christmas 1993, she said, without preamble. "A family in Minnesota. The father had just lost his job. The children didn't know yet. The parents tried to make Christmas special anyway, though they had no money. The tree should smell of desperation and love." Jeffrey stared at her. "What?" "You have one here. I can feel it. Show me your trees." Like the tall man, she examined trees methodically, rejecting most immediately. She found what she wanted near the front of the lot, a 6-foot Douglas fir. "This one," she said. "It remembers. How much?" $60. She paid in cash, exact change, and dragged the tree to her car by herself, refusing Jeffrey's help. She drove away, and Jeffrey watched her go with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Something was very wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, more people came. All of them asked for trees that remembered specific Christmases, specific families, specific traumas. A man wanted a tree that remembered Christmas 1978 and a house fire. A teenager wanted a tree that remembered Christmas 2004 and a mother's overdose. An elderly woman wanted a tree that remembered Christmas 1965 and a brother who hadn't come home from Vietnam. Jeffrey tried to refuse. He told them he didn't know what they were talking about, that trees were just trees. But they always found what they wanted, picking through his inventory until they located some specific tree that meant something to them. And they always paid in cash, exact change. Tyler and Madison noticed the strange customers, but wrote it off as holiday weirdness. Jeffrey couldn't explain it to them. How could he explain that people were buying grief, buying memories of trauma? On December 20th, his supplier called. "Jeff, I don't know what you're doing with those trees, but demand is through the roof. I've got 20 more customers asking for trees from your lot specifically. They're offering to pay double, triple normal prices. What's going on up there?" "I don't know," Jeffrey said honestly. "Well, whatever it is, capitalize on it. I can get you another 100 trees by tomorrow if you want." Jeffrey almost said no. He wanted to shut down the lot, go back to just selling hardware, forget this entire season. But something made him say yes, some compulsion he didn't understand. The new shipment arrived December 21st. Jeffrey and Tyler set up the additional trees, expanding the lot into an adjacent empty lot he rented from the city. By noon, customers were arriving, dozens of them, all with the same strange requests, all seeking trees that remembered specific Christmases. The trees sold out in 4 hours. His supplier called again, laughing with delight. "I've got 50 more trees on a truck right now. I'll have them to you by midnight. Jeff, you're going to make more this season than the last 5 years combined." The second shipment arrived, as promised. Jeffrey stayed up all night setting them up, working alone, because Tyler and Madison had gone home hours ago. At 2 a.m., working by floodlights in the December cold, he noticed something odd. Tags on the trees. Small tags, tied to branches with thin wire. Tags he was certain hadn't been there when the trees were delivered. He pulled one off and read it by flashlight. Christmas 1989, Detroit. The Williams family. 3 children. House fire. All survived but lost everything. Tree donated by neighbors. Smells of charity and shame and gratitude and loss. Every tree had a tag. Every tree documented some Christmas tragedy, some family's grief, some moment when the holiday had been tainted by death or loss or trauma. Jeffrey understood now. These weren't normal trees. They'd been present during moments of suffering, had absorbed those emotions somehow, had become vessels for grief. And the people who came to buy them were looking for those specific memories, seeking out echoes of their own traumas, or searching for pain that resonated with their losses. He should have burned the trees, should have refused the next shipment, should have shut down the lot and never sold another Christmas tree. But he didn't, because the money was extraordinary, and because something in him, some dark curiosity, wanted to see how far this would go. 3 more shipments arrived before Christmas Eve. His parking lot overflowed with trees. People lined up before dawn each day, clutching photos or letters or mementos, seeking trees that connected to their personal tragedies. Jeffrey sold every tree, taking in tens of thousands of dollars in cash. Christmas Eve, the tall man with the perfect face returned. "You've done well," he said. "Better than most." "What is this?" Jeffrey demanded. "What are these trees?" "Monuments, memory, grief made physical. Christmas is supposed to be joyful, but for many, it's the most painful time of year. The season highlights what's lost, what's missing, who's gone. These trees serve as focal points for that pain. People buy them, take them home, decorate them, and for a few weeks, they have a physical representation of their grief, something tangible to acknowledge. On January 1st, they'll dispose of the trees, and the grief will fade a little. Not disappear. Grief never disappears, but become more manageable. You're exploiting people's pain." The man tilted his head. No, we're providing a service. Would you rather they suffer alone, with no outlet? The trees help, and you've helped distribute them. You should be proud. I don't want this. Then you shouldn't have taken my $100. That was the agreement. You accepted payment for delivery, and in doing so, you agreed to become a distributor. Next year, you'll receive 10 times as many trees. The year after, 100 times. Your little lot will grow into an empire. You'll be rich beyond imagination. All you have to do is sell trees to people who are grieving. Jeffrey wanted to refuse, wanted to scream that this was wrong, immoral, evil. But he thought about the money in his safe, about the new truck he'd just bought, about the vacation he was planning. What if I don't want to do this next year? The man's smile was terrible. Then you'll become a tree yourself. That's the other side of the agreement. Distribute grief, or become part of someone else's. He left. Jeffrey stood alone in his empty lot, surrounded by tree stumps and fallen needles, the smell of pine heavy in the cold air. Christmas Day, Jeffrey closed the hardware store and stayed home, unable to face the holiday. On December 26th, he opened his safe to count the money from the tree lot. The cash was gone. In its place, hundreds of small tags, each documenting a Christmas tragedy, each smelling faintly of pine and grief. His truck was gone too, repossessed according to a notice on his door for non-payment. But he'd paid cash. Except now, apparently, he hadn't. Everything he'd earned from the grief trees had vanished, leaving only the memories of suffering. Jeffrey Palmer ran his Christmas tree lot again in 2018 and 2019, and every year after. The trees came, the customers came. He sold grief and loss and trauma year after year, trapped in an agreement he'd made without understanding. And every Christmas Eve, the tall man visited to remind him, distribute grief or become part of it. The trees always sold out. There was never a shortage of people seeking tangible representations of their pain. Grief was universal. Loss was guaranteed. And Christmas, despite all its joy and magic, would always be the hardest time of year for those who'd experienced tragedy. Jeffrey understood now. He was part of something vast and old, something that fed on human suffering, not out of malice, but out of purpose. Grief needed an outlet. Pain required acknowledgement. And sometimes, the best way to honor loss was to buy a tree that remembered, to take it home, to decorate it, to sit beside it in the dark, and let yourself feel everything you'd been holding back. The trees helped, in their way, for the people who needed them, and Jeffrey sold them year after year, getting richer in ways that didn't involve money, getting poorer in ways that did. The agreement was forever, and the trees always remembered. Story 6. The wrapped present that grew heavier. Nathan Cross lived alone in an apartment in Columbus, Ohio. At 37, he'd been divorced for 3 years and had no children. He worked as a software developer for a medical company, spent his evenings watching streaming services, and maintained exactly 2 friendships with former college roommates he saw maybe twice a year. His life was small, contained, and safe. That's how he liked it. December 10th, 2022, he came home from work to find a package outside his apartment door. A Christmas present, wrapped in glossy red paper with a silver bow, about the size of a shoebox. His name was on the tag, for Nathan. No return address, no indication of who'd sent it. Nathan brought it inside and set it on his kitchen table, examining it carefully. The wrapping was professional, the bow perfectly tied. He shook it gently. Something inside shifted with a soft sound, like fabric or paper. Not heavy. Maybe a pound. He considered opening it immediately, but decided to wait. Christmas was still 2 weeks away, and he'd always been the kind of person who waited to open presents. Some part of him still enjoyed the anticipation, even though he'd lost most of his enthusiasm for the holiday after the divorce. Nathan put the present on a shelf in his living room and went about his evening routine. December 11th, when he got home from work, he noticed the present looked slightly different. The red wrapping paper seemed darker, like it had aged overnight, and when he picked it up to examine it more closely, it felt heavier. Not significantly, maybe 2 pounds instead of 1, but definitely heavier. He shook it again. The sound inside had changed. Instead of soft shifting, he heard something harder, like wood blocks or stones. Nathan almost opened it then, but something stopped him. Some instinct that said once opened, whatever was inside couldn't be put back. So he returned the present to the shelf and tried to ignore it. December 12th, the present was noticeably heavier, maybe 5 pounds. Nathan weighed it on his bathroom scale, 4.7 pounds. The wrapping paper had darkened further from bright red to deep maroon. The silver bow looked tarnished. Inside, when he shook it, something rattled. Multiple objects, hard and heavy. Nathan took photos of the present with his phone, documenting the changes. He researched online. Present getting, heavier, and mysterious package, and Christmas gift that changes. Nothing useful came up. Prank videos, viral marketing campaigns, nothing that matched his situation. That night, he barely slept. He kept thinking about the present sitting on his shelf, getting heavier, changing. Around 3 a.m., he got up and checked on it. In the darkness, the maroon wrapping seemed to pulse slightly, like breathing. December 13th, the present weighed 9 pounds. The wrapping was now dark red, almost brown. The bow was completely tarnished, looking like old metal. When Nathan shook it, he heard something that sounded like chains. He called his ex-wife, Sarah, even though they rarely spoke. "Did you send me a Christmas present?" "No, why would I?" "I got a package. No return address. It's weird." "Throw it away, Nathan. If it's making you uncomfortable, just throw it out." Sound advice. But Nathan couldn't bring himself to do it. Some compulsion kept him from disposing of the present. It was addressed to him. It was his. He needed to know what was inside. December 14th, 14 pounds. The wrapping was now dark brown, like dried blood. The bow looked like rusted iron. Inside, the contents had stopped rattling. Now it sounded like liquid when he tilted it, like something sloshing. Nathan's hands trembled as he set the present back on the shelf. The living room felt colder when the present was nearby. His breath misted in the air, despite the thermostat showing 70 degrees. December 15th, 23 pounds. Nathan could barely lift it. The wrapping looked ancient, cracked, and peeling. The bow had partially disintegrated, and from the present, very faintly, he could smell something. Decay. Rot. Death. He called the police. 2 officers came to his apartment, examined the present, and agreed it was strange. But when they tried to open it, the wrapping wouldn't tear. They cut at it with scissors. The blades slid off the surface. They tried a knife. Same result. The wrapping paper was impenetrable. "Has anyone threatened you recently?" one officer asked. "Any enemies? Anyone who'd want to scare you?" Nathan couldn't think of anyone. He had no enemies. No one cared about him enough to play elaborate pranks. The police took photos and filed a report, but couldn't do much else. They suggested he take the present to the bomb squad if he was worried about explosives. But their handheld sensor had detected no chemical compounds or detonators. December 16th, 39 pounds. Nathan had to use both hands to lift it. The wrapping was black now, not brown, black like charred wood. The bow had fallen off completely. The smell was stronger, making his eyes water, and the present made sounds on its own now, without being moved. Grinding sounds, scraping, whispers. Nathan took the day off work. He sat in his living room, watching the present, afraid to take his eyes off it. He was certain that if he looked away, something would happen. The present would open by itself or move or do something worse. Around noon, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Nathan Cross. A voice he didn't recognize, gender ambiguous, speaking slowly. You have 6 days remaining. Who is this? Did you send the present? The present is yours. It's always been yours. We simply wrapped it. What is it? Your burden. Everyone carries one. Yours has been wrapped and given back to you, materialized, made physical. On December 22nd, you'll open it. You must open it. And when you do, you'll carry it forever. I don't understand. You will. The call disconnected. Nathan immediately tried calling back. The number was no longer in service. December 17th, 61 pounds. Nathan could no longer lift the present. It sat on his shelf, which was bowing under the weight. The wrapping was now pitch black and moving, like smoke or shadow, trapped beneath the surface. No bow remained. The smell was overpowering. Rot and death. And something worse. Something that smelled like despair. The whispers from inside were constant now. Nathan couldn't make out words, but he recognized the rhythm of speech. Multiple voices talking over each other, a desperate chorus. He tried to leave his apartment, pack a bag, and check into a hotel. But when he reached the door, he couldn't make himself open it. Some force prevented him, not physical, but psychological. He needed to stay with the present. He needed to see this through. December 18th, 97 pounds. The shelf collapsed. The present crashed to the floor, and Nathan heard something break inside. The whispers became screams. The smell became unbearable. And the wrapping started to tear on its own, small rips appearing in the black surface, revealing something underneath. Light, bright, painful light, like staring into the sun. Nathan covered his eyes and retreated to his bedroom, locking the door. He could hear the present in the living room, the wrapping continuing to tear, the screams getting louder. His phone rang. Same unknown number. 4 days, Nathan. What's in there? What did you do to me? We did nothing. The present is yours. The burden is yours. We simply made it visible. What burden? I don't understand. Your guilt, your regrets, your failures, every person you've hurt, every opportunity you've wasted, every moment of cruelty or cowardice, every time you chose the easy path instead of the right one. All of it, wrapped up, given form, growing heavier as Christmas approaches. By December 22nd, it will be too heavy to carry. That's when you'll open it. That's when you'll face it. This is insane. I haven't hurt anyone. I've lived a quiet life. I've been good. Have you? Have you really? The voice was almost gentle now. What about Sarah? You destroyed her trust. What about your father? You didn't speak to him for 3 years before he died. What about the promotion you stole from Denise by taking credit for her work? What about the homeless man you walked past last winter? The one asking for money for food? The one who died of exposure 2 days later? What about every small cruelty? Every thoughtless word? Every moment you chose yourself over others? Nathan hung up. His hands were shaking. He wanted to deny it all, to insist he was a good person, to claim innocence. But memory is a terrible thing. It doesn't lie. And as he sat in his locked bedroom, memories surfaced. Moments he'd forgotten, buried, ignored. Small acts of selfishness, larger acts of cruelty, relationships destroyed by his own cowardice, opportunities to help that he'd declined. Moments when he could have been better, kinder, braver, and instead had been small and selfish and weak. The present wasn't from someone else. It was from himself. December 19th, 142 pounds. The present had torn completely free of its wrapping. Nathan couldn't see it. He stayed in his bedroom, door locked. But he could hear it. Not screams anymore. Sobbing. Hundreds of voices crying. Every person he'd hurt. every regret given voice. December 20th, 208 pounds. The present had broken through the living room floor. Nathan heard the crash, heard his downstairs neighbor screaming. Fire alarms went off. The building evacuated. Nathan stayed in his bedroom, unable to leave, unable to face what he'd created. December 21st, 319 pounds. The present was consuming his apartment, expanding, growing. His bedroom door was bulging inward. The sobbing had become a roar, like a waterfall of grief. Nathan sat on his bed, waiting for December 22nd, waiting for the moment when he'd have to open the present, to face the burden he'd been carrying his entire life without realizing it. The weight of every sin, every mistake, every failure. At midnight, as December 21st became December 22nd, his bedroom door exploded inward. The present filled his doorway, massive now, the size of a car. The wrapping paper was gone entirely. Underneath was a mirror, perfect and reflective, showing Nathan his own face, but not as he was now, as he'd been. Every age, every moment, every version of himself that had made choices he regretted. Child Nathan, cruel to smaller kids on the playground. Teenage Nathan, mocking a classmate until she cried. College Nathan, cheating on exams. Adult Nathan, lying to Sarah, stealing credit from colleagues, walking past suffering without helping. All of him. Every version. Every sin. The voice on the phone spoke from the mirror, coming from his own reflection. Open it. Nathan reached out with shaking hands and touched the mirror. It rippled like water and opened, and inside was everything he'd done wrong, given form and substance. Not objects, not symbols. Actual moments, actual people, actual consequences. He could see Sarah crying, his father dying alone, Denise losing her job, the homeless man freezing. Every ripple effect of his selfishness made visible. Carry it, the voice said. This is your burden. Face it. Acknowledge it. Carry it forward, or be crushed by it. Nathan understood now. The present wasn't a punishment. It was a revelation. Everyone carried this weight. Everyone accumulated regrets and failures and sins. But most people never saw them all at once, never had to face the full weight of their moral failures. This was a gift in its way, a terrible gift, the chance to see clearly, to understand, to choose. Nathan stood up and stepped into the mirror, into the present, into his burden. The weight was crushing, unbearable. He fell to his knees, gasping, feeling like his skeleton would collapse under the pressure of his own guilt. But he didn't collapse. He stayed on his knees, feeling every ounce of it, every moment of pain he'd caused, every opportunity for kindness he'd missed. And slowly, painfully, he stood up. The burden was still there. It would always be there. But he was carrying it now, consciously, deliberately. Not ignoring it, not burying it, carrying it. When he opened his eyes, he was in his bedroom. December 22nd morning. The present was gone. His apartment was intact. No broken floor, no exploded door. Everything normal. Except Nathan himself. He felt different, heavier. Like he'd gained 100 pounds, but the weight was internal, spiritual. He could feel his burden now, constantly, with every breath. He called Sarah. I need to apologize, he said, for everything. I was wrong. I hurt you. I'm sorry. She was silent for a long time. Nathan, what's wrong? I just need you to know, I'm sorry. He called his old company and confessed to HR about taking credit for Denise's work. He lost his job. But he didn't care. He went to homeless shelters and volunteered. He donated money. He called everyone he'd hurt and apologized. Not because it made the weight lighter. It didn't. The burden remained constant. But carrying it consciously felt different than carrying it unconsciously. Better, more honest. Nathan Cross lived the rest of his life with his burden. Some days were harder than others. Some days the weight was almost too much, but he carried it every day, trying to balance past failures with present kindness. And every December 22nd, the present appeared on his shelf again, wrapped in red paper, starting small and light, growing heavier each day until Christmas. A reminder, a warning, a gift. The burden was his. It would always be his, but he was strong enough to carry it. That was the lesson. That was the present. Everyone's burden grows heavier as they age, accumulating sins and regrets. Most people ignore it until it crushes them. Nathan had been given the gift of seeing his clearly, of carrying it consciously. It was the worst present he'd ever received, and the most valuable. Story 7. The Christmas Eve that lasted forever. Graham Peterson lived in Seattle, Washington, where he worked as an architect for a mid-sized firm. At 45, he'd achieved moderate success, a nice condo overlooking Elliott Bay, a comfortable salary, and professional respect. He'd never married, had no children, and spent most of his time working. His coworkers joked that he was married to his job, and Graham didn't disagree. Architecture was his passion, his identity, his purpose. Christmas Eve 2019 should have been unremarkable. Graham worked until 6 p.m., finishing revisions on a commercial building project. The office was nearly empty. Most people had left by noon to be with their families. Graham's only plans were dinner at a decent restaurant and maybe watching a movie at home. He had nowhere to be, no one expecting him. He left the office at 6:15 p.m. The elevator descended from the 15th floor, and Graham checked his phone, reviewing emails. When the elevator dinged and the doors opened, he stepped out into the lobby and stopped. Something was wrong. The lobby looked the same marble floors, same security desk, same Christmas decorations on the receptionist's counter. But everyone was frozen. The security guard mid-step, the janitor with his mop raised, 2 people by the door, caught mid-conversation, not moving, not breathing, frozen like statues. Graham walked closer to the security guard, waving his hand in front of the man's face. No response, no blink, no breath, no pulse that Graham could detect. Just perfect stillness. "Hello?" Graham called out. His voice echoed strangely, flat and dead. "What's going on?" No answer. He pushed through the lobby doors onto the street, and the scene outside was the same. Cars stopped mid-drive. Pedestrians frozen mid-step. A bus halfway through an intersection, its passengers visible through the windows, all perfectly still. Snow was falling, but the snowflakes hung in the air, motionless, like the world had been put on pause. Graham felt his heart racing, felt his lungs working, felt the cold air on his face. He was moving, breathing, alive. But everything and everyone else had stopped. He pulled out his phone, 6:17 p.m. He waited, watching the clock. A minute passed, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. The time didn't change. 6:17 p.m., frozen. Graham walked through downtown Seattle in a daze. Everywhere he went, the scene was the same. People frozen in place. Cars stopped. The city silent except for his footsteps. Even the sound felt wrong, muffled, like he was walking through a photograph of the world rather than the world itself. He tried to rationalize it. Stroke, brain aneurysm, carbon monoxide poisoning, some medical event causing hallucinations. But everything felt real. The cold was real. The textures under his fingers were real. The frozen people were real. After an hour of wandering, though hour was meaningless since time had stopped, Graham made his way to his condo. The building's lobby was frozen like everything else. The elevator worked, but everyone inside was motionless. He rode up to his floor alone, his own breathing, loud in the silence. His condo was exactly as he'd left it that morning. He tried the TV, It wouldn't turn on. Computer, frozen on the login screen, unresponsive. Phone, still showing 6:17 p.m., apps non-functional. Graham sat on his couch and tried to process what was happening. Time had stopped. The entire world had stopped, except him. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt strangely calm. This was a problem to be solved, like architectural challenges he faced at work. There had to be an explanation. There had to be a solution. He went back outside. The frozen city was eerie, but not frightening. Graham walked through the silent streets, exploring. He entered buildings whose doors were unlocked. He rode the monorail, which moved when he operated the controls, threading between frozen passengers. He went to Pike Place Market, where vendors were frozen mid-sale, fish suspended in mid-throw. Hours passed, or what felt like hours, though his phone never changed from 6:17 p.m. Graham didn't get hungry or tired. He just kept moving through the static world, looking for answers. He returned to his office building, back to the 15th floor. His workspace was exactly as he'd left it. Computer on, showing his design software. Coffee mug, half empty. Papers scattered across his desk. On a whim, Graham sat down and resumed working. His computer functioned normally for him. He opened his project files and continued the revisions he'd been making. Time might have stopped, but he could still work. He worked for what felt like hours, perfecting designs, solving structural problems, creating the best work of his career. No interruptions, no meetings, no clients demanding changes, just pure focus. When he finally stopped, he'd completed projects he'd been struggling with for months. The work was brilliant, his best ever. Graham leaned back in his chair, staring at his screen. He'd wished for this, hadn't he? For time to stop so he could focus on work without distraction. For the rest of the world to pause while he caught up. Be careful what you wish for. He left his office and wandered the frozen city again. Days passed, or what felt like days, measured by his sleeping and waking rather than any change in the environment. The world remained locked at 6:17 p.m., December 24th, 2019. Christmas Eve, frozen forever. Graham explored every corner of Seattle. He read books in frozen libraries. He examined art in motionless museums. He walked through people's homes, seeing how they lived, how they decorated for Christmas, how they'd been in the middle of holiday preparations when time stopped. A family wrapping presents, a couple setting out cookies for Santa, a lonely old man watching TV by himself, all frozen, all trapped in that single moment. Graham began to understand. This wasn't just about him. Everyone in the world was frozen at whatever they'd been doing at 6:17 p.m. Pacific time on Christmas Eve. All across the globe, billions of people suspended in their Christmas Eve activities. Except Graham. He alone was free. He alone could move. After what felt like weeks, Graham started talking to the frozen people. He'd sit next to them and tell them about his day, his projects, his thoughts. They never responded, but it helped with the loneliness. He'd tell the frozen security guard in his building about architectural concepts. He'd tell frozen baristas at coffee shops about his childhood. He'd tell frozen strangers on the street about his fears and regrets. They made perfect listeners, never interrupting, never judging. Just frozen, silent witnesses to his confessions. Time passed, unmeasured, unmeasurable. Graham lived in the eternal Christmas Eve. He worked on architecture projects. He read every book in the Seattle Public Library. He taught himself to play the piano using frozen YouTube tutorials on library computers. He explored every building, every street, every corner of the city. He should have gone insane. Maybe he did. It was hard to tell when there was no one to reflect your sanity back at you. One day, or 1 year, or 1 decade, he'd lost track. Graham sat on a bench at Cary Park, looking out at the frozen Seattle skyline, the Space Needle, the skyscrapers, Elliott Bay, all suspended in twilight, snow hanging motionless in the air. "I'm ready," he said aloud to no one. "I understand now." And a voice answered, "Do you?" Graham turned. A woman stood beside the bench, not frozen, moving, breathing. She wore a simple coat and hat, and her face was kind but sad. "Who are you?" Graham whispered. "A guide, an observer. Call me what you like." She sat beside him. "You've been here a long time, Graham." "How long?" "Does it matter? Time is stopped. You could have been here an hour or 1,000 years. It feels the same. Why me? Why am I the only one moving?" "You're not. All across the world, there are others like you. People who were alone on Christmas Eve. People who had no one waiting for them, no one expecting them, no one who would miss them if they didn't come home. People whose lives had become so small that when time stopped, they slipped through the cracks." Graham felt tears on his face. "That's me. I was alone. I've been alone for years. Yes, you chose work over relationships. You chose solitude over connection. You built a life of isolation. So, when Christmas Eve froze, when everyone else was suspended in their moments of family and tradition and togetherness, you fell out of time. There was no one to anchor you. No one whose Christmas Eve included you. How do I get back?" The woman looked at him with deep sympathy. "You have to choose it. You have to decide that you want to be part of time again, part of the world, connected to other people. You have to want it enough to change how you live." "I do. I want that. I've learned. I've had years here alone to think. I understand now how important connection is, how I wasted my life. I'll change. I promise." "Then walk back to the moment where you fell out. Walk back to 6:17 p.m. and choose differently." Graham stood up. "Where? How?" "The elevator, where it started. Go back there. Get in. Ride it back up to where you were. And when the doors open, step out into connection instead of isolation." Graham ran through the frozen streets, back to his office building, into the lobby, the frozen security guard, the frozen janitor, the elevator. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the 15th floor. As the elevator rose, he felt something shift. Time was moving again, slowly at first, then faster, the elevator numbers climbing. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. The doors opened. Graham stepped out into his office floor, and time was moving. People were moving. He could hear voices, the hum of computers, the normal sounds of life. He checked his phone, 6:16 p.m. He'd gone back a minute, back to before the freeze, back to a moment when he could choose differently. His coworkers were gathering their things, heading home. Jennifer from accounting waved. "Merry Christmas, Graham. Any plans tonight?" Normally, he'd say no. Normally, he'd brush off the question and leave alone. "Actually," Graham said, "I was going to grab dinner somewhere. Would you like to join me, if you don't have other plans?" Jennifer looked surprised, but pleased. "My family dinner isn't until tomorrow. I'd love to." They rode the elevator down together, talking about holiday traditions and favorite restaurants. When the doors opened at 6:17 p.m., Graham held his breath. The lobby was full of life, people moving. The security guard walking his rounds, the janitor mopping. Everything normal. Graham and Jennifer walked out into the December evening, snow falling gently, the city alive with Christmas lights and movement and sound. Graham felt connected, grounded, part of the flow of time instead of suspended outside it. He never told anyone about his experience. How could he explain? But he lived differently after that Christmas Eve. He made friends. He dated. He accepted invitations. He showed up for people. He never worked late on Christmas Eve again. And every year, at exactly 6:17 p.m. on December 24th, Graham stopped whatever he was doing and looked around at the people near him, grateful for their movement, their warmth, their existence, grateful that time was flowing, that he was part of the world, that he hadn't been left behind in the frozen moment. Some people lived their entire lives alone, suspended in isolation they didn't even recognize. Graham had been given the terrible gift of experiencing it literally. Time stopped, world frozen, complete solitude, and he'd been given the greater gift of escaping it. Connection wasn't just nice to have. It was what anchored you in time, in reality, in life itself. Without it, you could slip through the cracks of the world and find yourself trapped in a moment that never ended, alone forever in a Christmas Eve that never became Christmas Day. Graham Peterson understood now, and he never forgot.